G'day. I'm G'day. I'm Stephen Travers. Look, welcome to this live session. First one I've done for a little while, but that's just how my life's been at the moment. But this one, I thought we'd look at photos, drawing from photos as our topic, because, sorry, I just realized I haven't chat set up. Let me just add a welcome to the chat there. Right, now I know that's happening. Yeah, welcome everyone. So drawing from photos, I've done a few videos lately that have touched on using photos. Hi there. And so it maybe just reflect on the pros and cons of drawing with photos. And of course, I'd love to know your experiences either in the chat if you're watching this live, or as a comment if you're watching it after the live session finishes. But let's face it, photos are probably, for most of us, how we draw. For most of us, it's probably the most convenient way to have a wide and interesting number of subjects that are accessible. I mean, I'm old enough that I'm still amazed at the online world and just how easily we can access things that when I was young really was a lot of effort and quite difficult to do, to get a range of subjects if you didn't happen to live in Paris or New York or somewhere where there were lots of obvious beautiful things to draw. I guess because I draw architecture mainly, I think of cities and having cities that are have world-class architecture. But like, if I'm an artist, what is the problem with drawing from photos? Is there a problem? Let me say up front, most of my drawing experiences is from photos. So I have no problem with that. It's great to draw live, and I do that sometimes. Starting to draw when COVID was hitting was not a great way to develop a location sketching style. So I actually drew from photos to prepare for live sketching when things opened up again and we were able to travel back to Paris and some of the other cities that love me. That I love. All right, so let's go through some of the pros and cons. So this first one is our pro, and that's that when I look at a photo, it's already two-dimensional. If you've ever wondered why it's easier to draw from a photo than to draw from real life, than to draw from a situation where you're sitting looking at your subject, it's because, well, when we look at real life, it's three dimensions. It has form, it has height and breadth, and it also has depth. And we can see that. And it's not just depth in that particular objects are 3D, but it's depth in that this object is closer to this one, is closer to this one. And the distance, possibly, depending where we're looking, could be far distant. And we perceive all of those things because we have two eyes and they each see what we're seeing from a slightly different perspective, position. And our brain combines those two images to create the depth, the sense of depth that's in front of us. Now, when I have a photo, it's not three-dimensional, not just because it's on a two-dimensional sheet of paper, but a camera has only one lens and therefore cannot capture that sense of depth that we have. So that's the first, well, I've put it as a pro for a photo, in that we don't have to turn it from 3 dimensions into 2 dimensions. We already have that in our photo. So that's why photos feel easier to draw from, because let's face it, when you're on location and it's in front of you, particularly if it's a fairly layered subject, every time you move your head just ever so slightly, the view changes. What's in front of something else shifts, let alone if you drop your pencil and have to get up from your seat and pick it up, and you may not sit back in exactly the right spot. And that sounds pretty minimal until you're trying to draw, and every time you look up, it's not quite the same. And you don't know whether you need to adjust what you've done for what you see now, but you know next time you look up, it's going to be different again. And if you're trying to draw details such as people or cars and they keep moving, so all of those things obviously can be an issue with life, and they're easier with a photo. And I think in that way, drawing from a photo is a more kind way to start to learn to draw. Although I would equally say if the real passion that someone has is to do location sketching, I would say where possible, start doing that, because always start the way you want to end up if you know where you want to end up, or at least for this stage of your drawing. Okay, well, moving on from what I just said, the next point is a con for drawing from photos, and that's because it has reduced 3D to 2D, it flattens everything we see. And this is one of the biggest problems I see in people drawing from photos, trying to copy the photos as precisely as they can, is that their drawings capture the weaknesses of the photo, which is a very two-dimensional appearance. And they do that because they capture all the detail that we see all at once. It's important to realize that in life, it's not just that when we look at things in 3 dimensions, we see 3D. Something else happens that's really significant. We focus on certain things, and often it's whatever's closest in front of us, because that's probably what we need to see first, at least that we just don't trip over it and hit our head. So we focus on one thing. Now, when we focus on that, we see it very clearly. But that means that what's around it and behind it, to some degree, goes out of focus, depending on the relative distances and things and all of that. And what that means is that when I'm looking at, say, a tree in front of me, even if there are trees all around it, those trees are less sharp and the colors are less bright. My brain is filtering them out while it focuses on what I'm seeing. Now, that's part of our sense of reality, is that when I'm looking at something, that part of it is in higher focus and other parts are in less and less focus, simply because of the way my brain is prioritizing things. Now, in the camera, it captures all the detail, not just the focal detail. And if it's a good camera, it's all fairly sharp. Well, that's a problem, because if I'm just copying my photo, I'm probably going to copy all of that detail, not just my focal point, but I will have the same amount of detail copied all over the drawing, as much as it's possible for me to do, given what the particular detail may be. Now, does that ring a bell for anyone? Does that sound that could be the way it works for you sometimes? Because this is a significant reason, I think, why a lot of photos look very flat, because we've removed the things that we perceive and the way we perceive in life, and we've just copied all the weaknesses of the photo. Now, sometimes having those details in our photo is actually a strength, but it's not. It's a strength because we can use that detail, and we can possibly combine it with what we know of the depth. Because recreating the depth, if I want a drawing that looks real, if I want to capture a sense of realism, that this for a moment gives you a glimpse of being in this location, and more than just that, but tweaking some aspect of the experience of being in that place through our art, through our line work and mark making and value and color, to highlight something of that experience. Then I don't want to just be copying all of that detail as it is. I want to manipulate how I present that detail to accentuate whatever the thing in that scene that appealed to me that I want to capture and possibly present to the viewer is. So that was the third point, and it was the second con against using photos, that they give us too much detail. There's more there than we can easily use well, unless we're liberated from feeling the need to copy it. It's very easy for some people, and this is probably as much a personality type as a skill or knowledge type, but that we feel that for our drawing to be as proper as possible, we need to copy the photo as closely as possible. Well, there are all sorts of problems with that. So let me tell you, it's far more liberating just to see the photo as a springboard, as a starting point. There's inspiration in here. There's inspiration that's made me want to draw it and try and bring something out from this scene, and that's great. But there are also things that will count against that in my drawing if I include them. So I need to be perfectly free to leave out, remove, adjust anything in the photo that's not going to um, facilitate what I'm trying to do. That's going to make it more difficult, more obscured, whatever. Okay. In fact, the camera can actually capture even more detail, and this is, I've put this as a con. You might think it's a pro, but I've put it as a con. The camera can even capture more detail than we see in life, particularly as we move further back, depending a little bit on my eyesight and my glasses, what my natural ability to capture detail when it moves further back. But a photo, because it captures it and it puts it into a small space, we can actually see more detail more easily. And again, that can be confusing. It can cause problems. It certainly gives more work to have to think through, because there are now more decisions to be made with this detail that I wasn't so aware of before. Right. Well, this one's a little left field in that it's got nothing to do with any of the other ones or any of the ones I'm going to say. But this con is that photos have copyrights. You know, as an artist, we may not like the fact that someone might grab one of our designs or drawings off the internet and do something and make that part of a creative process that they're doing. So maybe they print it on t-shirts to sell. I may not be particularly grabbed by that. But if I'm a photographer, and this is what as artists we need to appreciate, if I'm a photographer and I've taken photos and I have very carefully composed those photos, and I'm sure tweaked those photos on whatever apps I use to really enhance what my inspiration and my purpose as a photographer for that photo have been, then I'm not going to want artists to just take that and to use that as part of their creative journey or creative process in producing an artwork that they're going to print and put on t-shirts or whatever. It's a very real issue. And it may be that a particular artist doesn't mind, or it may be that they do. And that's why when we draw the artwork, when we draw an artwork from someone else's photo, we should always make sure that we have their permission to use their photo, to draw from their photo. Must admit, I was surprised when I found out that a drawing from someone's photo was a copyright infringement if it was done without permission, because I thought, well, gosh, my drawing is going to look nothing like the photo. How can it really be accused of being the same thing? You know, I wish it were, but it's not. But no, and I've come to understand that more and more. And so on my Instagram page, if you've seen any of my really quite complex, larger drawings that I do there, that take me about 6 hours to draw, part of the reason that I think most of them are so good is that I draw from the photos of a number of Parisian photographers who very, very kindly give me permission to do so. And I always acknowledge that in the comments. And in fact, I often in the comments, if I have a chance to comment and people say that they, love the composition, I say, well, the photographer did the composition, and the photographer did such great composition that I didn't have to change it at all. I just used their composition. And so now you can start to see why copyright, I think, is a valid issue. And as artists, we should respect that, because we know what it's like for our artwork, or we know that the possibility of our artwork being seized by someone else without our permission. So let's not do that to our photographer friends. But equally, don't be shy to ask permission, because in my experience, photographers are very generous people. Okay. All right. This next point is also a con, and that is I mentioned again earlier that when we draw from photos, we should see them as a starting point. We should see them as a springboard for our own creative thinking and translation and inspiration. They're part of our inspiration. But the temptation is to copy it. The temptation is to actually grab the photo and to just aim to reproduce it and to create marks or put lines that as closely as possible capture everything I see in the photo. And if you're watching this now, I'd love to have a comment. Is this something that, hi, me too. Is this something that you do when you draw? That when you see a photo, you really work hard to capture all of the detail that you see. It's a natural thing to do, but it's not something that I think, well, I'm not sure that it ever really reproduces a realistic or a drawing with a sense of realism of our scene. I don't think it does, because it's not how we see things in life. When we want to create a realistic effect in our drawing, it's not just by drawing things that are accurate, but it's by drawing things that are presented in the whole scene in the way we perceive a whole scene when we look, because that's what's actually real to us. The way something looks when we walk out the back door, and we focus on something, and the way that affects everything around us, that's actually realism for us, because we don't see every part of a scene in the same detail. So we need to use it as a starting point. But the pro is that a photo can be a very strong starting point, because it works out so much for us. And yeah, in all realism, I do try to choose photos that have as few adjustments as necessary as possible, because it simply makes the process easier. But if the only photo I've got is the only photo I've got of something I want to draw, then I certainly need to do my best to eliminate all the weaknesses that are in that drawing and to that are in that photo, and to rearrange things in my drawing to perhaps capture the scene that I hoped that the photo would have captured in the first place. Sometimes it's as easy as rearranging the light, as of putting the sun in a different part of the sky. I've done many drawings where the main subject was backlit, because that's simply the time of day I was there. And I've put the sun back on the other side so that the sun is shining directly onto the facade. And depending where we put it and how much experience we have drawing architecture on sunny days, it's not that difficult to at least do a credible version of where the shadows might be with the sun in that position. But of course, there aren't as many shadows anyway. Okay. Well, the next pro and con is to do with choosing photos. Is we could choose a poor photo, or for that matter, perhaps as a pro, what makes a good photo? What's a good photo to draw from? What's a poor photo to choose from? And if I choose one that doesn't have much potential, then really unless I'm really just using this photo as a springboard, as I talked earlier, then I'm really hamstringing my drawing potential. I'm really limiting, before I even start what I draw, how it can possibly look, how good, how effective my drawing can be. So I want to make sure it's a good photo. And again, this makes the temptation to grab a really good photo that I come across online. And in one sense, the better the photo, the greater the chance that the photographer makes at least some of his living, or her living, or their living out of it. So I think it's important to make sure we ask permission where possible, where it's at all possible, to track down the photographer and not to get into copyright issues. Another problem with photos is that, particularly if it's not perhaps a good photo, or maybe it's an older photo when cameras didn't quite work as clearly as our digital ones do today, maybe there are some unclear parts in the photo. And again, I've seen many drawings that I've thought, I think there was in this part, in this shadow, they couldn't really see what was going on. And because of that, what's being drawn is really not credible. They've tried to draw the uncertainty, but in some way that's far more difficult than trying to draw something that's clear. And so, yeah, the enthusiasm for the parts of the scene, the parts of the photo that they enjoyed, that they liked, that inspired them, yeah, meant that there was the commitment to draw. But then when it got to these parts, didn't know what to do. Um, if it's an old photo, there's probably nothing that can be done. But if it's a digital photo, particularly, make sure with every photo that there are dark values, that you explore the possibilities that the digital world give us, that you explore the possibilities of playing with the exposure firstly. Now, exposure is the one, if you've got a photo that was taken in dark shadows, there wasn't enough light, or it might have been a hot sunny day, but there are some very strong shadows cast that hide what's behind something. It's very rare that drawing that very dark space totally as a very dark space, particularly if it's larger, looks satisfactory in our drawing. It will probably look like a big dark sinkhole. What I need to do is try and perceive what's in those shadows so that I can at least suggest a hint of them in whatever mark making I do for that section. And the best way to use that is to use the exposure, not the contrast, not the lights and darks adjustments, but just go to the exposure and crank it right back down to as overexposed as it will go, or right up actually to as overexposed as it will go. And that will really let you see with a lot of clarity into those shadows. In fact, sometimes when I do it, almost the entire rest of the drawing photo goes to white, but I can see into the shadows surprisingly clear. And so I print that off, and now I know that detail that's in there, and it's simply up to me to choose how strongly will I show it, how much will I tone back the darkness so that a little bit of this comes forward to make that space more interesting, more credible, whatever, or simply not to attract so much attention. Because again, that shadow, while shadows do attract attention, it may not be the focal point of the drawing. So that's actually a real pro with using photos, is that we can play with the adjustments, and it's not just to see more clearly what's in the photo, but I almost always with photos where the values, the lights and darks, are a significant part, particularly if they're strong contrast, I always play with the contrast now to make the lights lighter and the darks darker by degree. Because if I like the shadows and the contrast in a photo, maybe if I crank them up, they look a little bit better. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe they're a little too overblown. So if I reduce the contrast a little, then maybe that creates, for what I'm wanting to do, a better scene. So always experiment. And sometimes I can get a scene, particularly with architecture, where the light simply wasn't very strong that day, but I want my drawing to have more dramatic light. And so I do crank up the contrast, and I find it lets me see not just more clearly where the shadows are, but judge the relative values between shadows, some shadows that are darker than others, and just what's happening with bouncing light. So again, it can help me understand my scene far more accurately and create more effects visually for me to see, that then I can choose whether I want to try and translate those effects in some way onto my drawing. Hi there. Hi there, would-bees. Yep. Do you, the people watching me now, the 12 people who are live on air now, do you draw from photos? I'd love to hear from your comment. Or do you try not to? Do you try to draw from life? Or do you always draw from photos? What's your photo experience? I'd love to hear that. Okay. What's my next point? Yep, we can adjust the photos. We can also adjust the size of the photo. And again, don't just print off. If you now, I know a lot of people don't print off copies, but I think it's the same if we're looking digitally. The size of our drawing is really important. I think when we're using it as the size of our photo. Sorry, the size of our photo is really important. Um, whether it's larger or smaller. That's okay, Zach. You're welcome. Hola, Maria. Hola. ¿Cómo estás? Um, it's really important to choose the right size for a number of reasons. Um, when I'm for me personally, most of my drawing these days is doing drawings with as demos on YouTube videos. So for me, it makes that whole process much easier and I think visually more satisfying for the viewer to have my reference photo, which I always have on camera, with my drawing paper and my actual drawing taking place. So I think that's but besides I think being more helpful for the viewer, it's also easier because I can kind of just look across. I'm drawing the same size, and so just on the horizontal, I can level things by eye, or I can, you know, sometimes you'll see me draw my pen, not touching the paper, but just to get alignment for my vertical things. It doesn't help in the other direction, but that's okay. We have to do the hard work sometimes, drawing. Um, and what I often do, and what you'll normally see me do, is I will put low adhesive tape, which is available from any uh, hardware store. It's just the sort of tape they use in painting. I put that around the same border because, again, that visually helps me line up details in my reference more easily on my paper because I'm drawing freehand with pen. And so being able to judge how far something is from the edge on any of the four sides is a lot easier, and I want my demo to go well. I used to just put it on to keep the edges clean, and then I realized that I was actually using it for positioning. So now, even when it's not particularly needed for lines that run off the page, if there's not a lot of hatching on the edges or something, I still put the tape on because it so much speeds up that process. Equally, if I have a reference, but I want to simplify my drawing, I don't want to draw all the detail. Maybe it's a page in a book and it's a forest scene and there's lots and lots of leaves and branches and twigs and details and birds and things, and I can see so much in this, and I don't want to copy all of that in my drawing. Making our reference smaller simply compresses that detail, some of it to the point where I can't see it anymore. And therefore, I'm not going to be tempted to do one of the earlier cons that we've talked about of trying to copy everything that I see. In a sense, it's going to simplify that simply on in a mechanical and visual way so that I can't see that detail anymore. Now, there'll still be a challenge to draw what I can see, but it has, if you like, partly done that process as well. So yeah, so making the photo very small can, particularly when we want to do quick gestural drawings as well. If it's a complex building, a complex scene, and I was thinking of a grand architecture with complex perspective, a smaller reference lets us see the whole thing all at once more as well. And that can be handy for helping us to get our angles more correct because we can sort of see everything in one take, if you like. We're not having to do this. So I think if we're particularly drawing architecture, particularly if we have problems with perspective, we shouldn't use photos and we shouldn't attempt to then draw them too large until we're able to draw them smaller accurately, because I think it's both more satisfying from a personal point of view, but from a learning point of view, it's also better to do what's easier and to master that in the same skill, I mean, and then to push that skill, out, which we then can do. Yeah, comment about that's their challenge, wanting to draw everything in the photo, and feeling that somehow feeling that somehow if it's going to be a good photo or a proper photo or a drawing or a proper drawing, then we need to copy the photo exactly. That somehow we're not being honest or real or whatever if we don't. I never actually thought that, but I think I had a bit of that around the edges as well, and it took some time to realize, no, actually the photo has weaknesses. It's not noble to try and draw them all. And I began to look at, I think part of the way I became aware of this was partly through painting trees for 10 years before I drew. But when I was drawing with pencil and I was looking at a lot of pencil drawings, although I didn't draw portraits, it's always wonderful seeing good drawings of faces of people, and particularly portraiture. But I realized that a lot of them looked very flat. They looked very, very flat, very two-dimensional. Particularly a lot of pencil portraits where there's a great emphasis on kind of rubbing and to get the very smooth transitions of everything, and then quite strong lines. And at some point I realized that they all had this sameness about them, and that it was because photos of portraits all had this certain sameness about them, that they tended to flatten the face, that what we see and perceive in 3 dimensions in a lot of photos, unless there's a lot of dramatic lighting to stop this happening, creates a very, very smooth look. And I think photographically that's even on trend a bit at the moment, to have a very smooth look. But when we copy that in our drawings, if our aim is to reproduce that as accurately as we can, then what we do is we copy the flatness, and our faces can start to look like sheets of paper with features drawn on them. So I think that's how I began to become aware of the weakness of drawing from photos. And then, while I don't draw portraits, you might know, if you know my channel, particularly just as support acts on the edges of street scenes. But because I became aware of that weakness there, I began to look for it in the things I did draw, and discovered that the same traps were there, just in different ways. G'day, Scott. Welcome. Thanks, Chris, for that. Yeah. So that was the last one. We can easily adjust the size of our reference to make it easier to draw, because we simplify detail down. And particularly if I want to do a quick gestural drawing, then don't have a big A4 size reference. We're just going to get caught up in detail and stop us from developing the brisk, easy style that probably we want to do. Okay. Look, 2 more pros with photos, drawing from photos. It's firstly, every conceivable subject is easily available. So whatever I like to draw, whether it's people or life drawing or animals or children's portraits, whether it's grand architecture, whether it's landscapes, whether it's trees, whether it's birds, whatever, it's all there. And secondly, I can deliberately choose a progression of references from easy to more difficult. And if I'm learning to draw, and if I'm conscious of learning to draw, as opposed to, we're always learning, we never stop learning, but there's a period at the start where we're not as experienced and we're very consciously trying to develop our skill level and the results that we get. Then if I'm aware that that's me, then a great thing with photos is that I can start with simpler ones, because there is so much choice. It's not just choice of subjects, but it's choice of difficulty as well. So whatever subjects stir my creative passions and make me want to draw them, I should start with the simplest photographic examples of those that I can find and not move on to more complex ones until I'm happy with the way I'm capturing whatever effect it is I'm trying to capture from my references. Because it won't be easier to get them from more difficult photos if we can't capture that effect from simpler ones. You know, and it's often helpful. I find in thinking of learning to draw, we think of learning to play the piano. We don't move on to more difficult pieces until we've learned to play well the simpler ones, and then we build on that as we move on. And then we only have the newer things that we have to particularly work hard to become proficient in, and so forth. Drawing is not dissimilar, and we can't choose simpler pieces to play, but we can choose less challenging things to draw. And not things that aren't challenging, but things that have a limited challenge for us at that level at that point. So that's good. Of course, we could always go the other way and choose things that aren't appropriate, I guess. Great thing about drawing from photos is that we can leave it and come back to it, and it's still exactly the same. If you've drawn on location, you certainly can appreciate the frustration of what can be rapidly changing weather conditions. Yeah, or other problems that keep making it change. I was When we first arrived in Vienna at one trip, or the last trip, I guess, I found a place in that big square in front of the cathedral, and I sat down. It was just starting to rain, so it was a bit drizzly. So I was sitting sort of right back under a very little a bit of cover from a ledge on a building that was overhanging me, because that was the scene I wanted to draw. And after I committed to that spot, I found that it was the spot where big tour buses and other big buses all drew up in front of and let people out. Now, fortunately, no one parked in front of me, but there was forever a big bus pulling up, and for 5 minutes while people got out, I was just sitting there hoping that it would leave. And so it wasn't a great location. So they can be some of the problems drawing on location. So good thing about a photo is that we don't have that. And in fact, if I want to get up and make some lunch and come back to it, or something I only have half a day or an hour, I can come back to it after a lengthy break in a way that isn't feasible with drawing from life. So that's a great thing. Scott saying that he, yes, always wanted to jump ahead in difficulty and play the pieces that excited him rather than the pieces that probably he was up to playing. Yeah. But pointing out that it did take practice and time, as does drawing. Yeah, we can come back to the exact same photo and the exact same scene and draw it later. And look, and this is actually my last point. So I'd love to hear any comments that you have, or if you have any other questions about just drawing in general that you want to ask me. I always like to take the chance when I'm live to answer any questions. I'm probably going to have a video somewhere on it, but with over 800 videos now on YouTube, you may not necessarily come across it easily, or maybe I can point you into the direction of it. So if you have any general questions about drawing, the drawing journey, general or more technical, please, or just any questions about my drawing journey, happy to answer them. But this next point is that if we use photos the right way, they actually can be good practice for location sketching. And I did start drawing from photos when I was wanting to prepare to go back to Europe for a trip that unfortunately was cancelled, a trip that was planned for in 2020 to Europe, and that we haven't been back since. But I was wanting to do street sketching there, and because of all lockdowns and stuff, I couldn't even practice in our streets because Sydney was very heavily locked down. I think more than most cities in the world, except maybe the other Australian city. Well, the city of Melbourne, also in Australia. But so I actually began to draw from photos to practice to get ready for street sketching. So I tried to do my drawings relatively quickly and to um, um, be gestural. And that's why I began to draw directly in ink, because I wanted to be able to draw directly in ink. My drawing up until that stage had been uh, grids and pencil outlines and then inking over the top. But I thought, well, that's obviously not going to work on location. So to be ready for location sketching, I need to be learning to draw directly in ink, although that certainly scared the perfectionist in me. So look, we can use drawing from photos as preparation or skill development, even if location sketching is what we want to do. A question here, I think. Hi, Stephen. Just started watching your videos. Thanks, Troy. And I've learned a great deal about composition. I was not progressing in art skills just a couple of times, and I forced myself to follow. Well, I hope my videos give you some help in that. But great to have you on board my channel. And if you find my channel interesting, please tell your friends who draw. Me too. What's the best way to make color photos to buy, especially to black and white, especially when they've already been printed? Look, I think just make sure that you, in terms of price, and look, let's face it, ink is expensive. I spend a fair bit of money on ink. It's a bit unavoidable for what I do. But the important thing to remember is if I want a black and white photo, and I often print a black and white photo, well, not often, but certainly it depends on the scene. But if it's a scene where the contrasts are going to be really important and I'm going to do a lot of hatching to create shades of gray with my black line, then I will often do a black and white photo as well. The important thing is to make sure in the print screen that we tick black and white. Just the fact that I've desaturated to 0% the color, and therefore on the screen it looks black and white. If I don't click black and white, it will still use color blends to create the, if you like, black effect. And so that's going to be more expensive. So that's my only suggestion. Make sure you select that little black and white box with the tick, and don't just print the black through color blend. Do I always just draw one image, or do I ever combine elements from? Yeah. There are two ways we can go beyond our image. One is we can just extend it from our imagination. And sometimes in a bush scene or some of the more rural scenes where I feel like just a little more, if the road could just go a little more to the left, I can just add a couple of centimeters and just extrapolate whatever foliage is there or whatever scene is there slightly more. The last interior drawing I did from Palais Garnier, from the old Paris Opera House, now known as Palais Garnier, and I think the home of Paris Ballet now, rather than the Opera House. I had two photos that I took, one kind of looking up into the roof and one looking down towards the ground floor level of the interior of the grand staircase. And I combined those two photos. And of course, they didn't exactly combine because in tilting them, I create different angles. But I use the information in both of them and kind of, I mean, there's probably a photo app that would have combined them perfectly, but I don't have that. Yeah, so that is something that we can do as well, certainly. It does, there is a bit of a, I guess, a knack to it, but I'm fairly used to changing the distortion in cameras. So actually, this is a point, this will make 20 points, I think. There is we need to be aware of the lens distortion. So when I take a photo, it tends to pull the vertical lines in towards the center, and it can create a very dramatic effect, especially if we're partly looking up. That can exaggerate that effect, and it's an effect that we do get in real life, but not nearly to the degree we have it in the photo. And so buildings that in life do look straight up. Are my lines straight? Oh, do look straight up. In the photo, these same verticals will look like this photo taken from exactly the same place. So it's important to think, do I want them in my drawing? Are they a helpful or an interesting, um, a productive distortion, or do I want to make the lines go back straight up again? And if you do want to make the lines go vertical again, the question is, in the photo, if you were to draw a line across any part of this building that's now like this, where is the true width? Where is the part where the gaps between things are actually the relative positions that you want? And the question is, and the answer is, of course, on eye level. So if you want to get rid of the distortion, find eye level. I've got lots of videos on that. Look in my perspective playlist, lots of videos on that. Find eye level, and that gives you the distance between windows and doors and so forth, and buildings, people, whatever. That's accurate, and then just take all those straight up. It's a good thing to do just for practice, even if because when we draw on location, we tend not to do that, even when we're looking sort of up. And I don't mean up and down from the paper up to the view, but especially if we draw architecture, I suppose, from sort of straight ahead, looking up at a second floor, a tower, something. I love tree roots, as they're picking. How to capture the likeness of tree roots. Yeah. Well, same way we capture anything. Where I live, there's a gorge quite close by, and so gorges are very steep, and we have lots of trees that grow, big, huge trees that grow right on the edge, and and sometimes the actual trunk is right on the edge, but the roots kind of come down and go in, and you see them kind of gnarl and curl out and wrap around rocks, trying to anchor these, trees that are dozens and dozens of meters high. And I often have thought they'd be a great drawing subject. I think if we want to capture the roundness, then we really have to work at how do we capture 3 dimensions. And it partly depends what medium I think we're drawing, whether we're drawing with pencil or with pen. But it's also a bit like tree branches, I guess, because like a root and a branch are the same things, basically. One of them is in the ground and one of them is in the air, but in lots of ways they're very similar. And so it's capturing the rolling effect of the roots that's important. And I think branches, for the same reason, are often a weak spot of trees. And for many ways that they're a weak spot. But yeah, look, I would, in some ways, practice drawing branches will probably help you. See, again, this is the problem with drawing from photos. And because I love drawing trees, I'm very aware of this. When I look at a tree in life, I see it. I see there are branches coming towards me, away from me at angles, in the opposite direction on the other side of the tree. There's this 3-dimensionality of branches. But when I look at a photo, they kind of all, it's almost like they all feel like they're mostly going out to the sides. at 180 degrees parallel to me. Because of that flattening effect, I don't get the sense of this branch is coming right out at me. Whereas in life, I need to, I will look at that branch and I won't even see the rest of the tree in detail. So this is when I talk about the distortions, if you missed them earlier in the video, that photos bring, that actually make it difficult for the artist. A very helpful thing to do to get over this, I think, is to go and take a photo of a tree that you know, and then look at the photo. And I think it's even better to print it off than to look at it digitally. Print it off onto a sheet of paper, go back to the tree and sit in front of it and think, okay, just see how much less 3D, just to appreciate how much less 3D the photo is to the actual tree. It's a great thing to do, and it really alerts us to the challenge that we have. And once we've done that, then we'll always start to look at the branches, or to look for the branches coming out at us, because it is the same with roots. Just getting back to that point, it's appreciating what parts of these roots are coming towards us, are curving around, and capturing that sense that even in a relatively small section of roots, that a part of it's closer. It's creating that sense of depth, and all my videos on creating depth, capturing the realism of depth in what we draw. All of those points count in what I'm talking about now. Doesn't have to be a scene that goes back 20 miles to the horizon. It could be a scene that goes back 1.5 meters, but within that 1.5 meters, we still want to capture a sense of depth. Hang on, did you bring markers in addition, or is it just pen when I started street? When I first started street sketching, it was in Paris and it was pencil. Then when I came home, it was still pencil for a while, but I used hatching, and then I switched to pen, and it was just hatching for a while, and then it was ink. Let me think. I mean, I haven't done a huge amount of street sketching. It's one of those things I keep. I just haven't been able to organize it. It's why most of my so many drawings of trees, because I live in a fairly rural part on the outskirts of Sydney. So, which is great, but when you love drawing architecture, it's a bit of a hassle. Look, I've sometimes used pen on location. Generally, I hatch more because it's just easier, and I quite like a loose gestural hatching style as well. So, yeah. Do I use Pinterest for reference photos? Look, I started a Pinterest account once, and straight away I didn't really know how to use it or how to get back into it, and I don't know that I've even got my password anymore. So I think I posted about 2 drawings from my Instagram channel on it. It's one of those things I probably should do. The problem with Pinterest is copyright, as I talked about earlier. If I'm not happy as an artist to have someone grab my drawing and use it as part of their creative process without my permission or acknowledgement, and by that I could mean just sticking it on their craft items and selling them. If I'm not happy with that, then why would I think it's okay for me to break the copyright of photographers by drawing their photos without their permission? And I probably was surprised that drawing from a photo is still close enough, like it is actually a copyright infringement, even if your drawing doesn't particularly look like it. And the truth is most of the time, if I'm just drawing because I'm learning to draw, it's not going to be a problem. I'm only doing exercises. I'm not creating artworks. I'm not going to sort of sell them or print them. It's part of my ongoing journey. But once I get to the point where I think maybe I'm going to put some of these on cards or sell them, have an exhibition, then I really need to either have permission from the photographers, or take my own photos. So increasingly, that's what I do. So I've had to become a better photographer in order to become a better artist. I'm glad photos are very, the cameras are pretty intuitive to use these days. All that stuff that's just auto now that my photographer friends had to learn and study and become skillful at decades ago. All right. Well, look, we're coming up to an hour, and this is not my usual time for doing these. And I got up early to do it, and then we had no Wi-Fi for various reasons, so we had to get that sorted. So a bit later than normal. So for the 12 people who are left, firstly, if any of you haven't hit like, why not hit the like button for me? That'd be nice. And are there any questions about drawing? Do I mind being called a drawer? Not at all. I was a high school teacher once. I've been called lots of things. Hoping I'll do some more wildlife. Oh, look, I got to say, there are very few things I've done, drawings, where I haven't used the video. But there's some. I've got two bad drawings of the same kangaroo that didn't make the cut, and they both have problems. I actually came across a kangaroo on my walk not that long ago. I didn't see him. He scared the life out of me. I was walking down the gorge editing, so I was looking down, and he was right next to me where there was a big ravine, and it was this explosion of grass and this incredibly loud thump, as they're incredibly strong, as he jumped out of sight. And it was just a rustle and a noise, but the power of the jump, I knew that the only thing it could be was a kangaroo or a wallaby. It could have been. It certainly wasn't a bird or a snake, which were the other options. And I could hear him then bounding away to put a bit of distance with me. So yeah, I'd like to be able to draw a kangaroo. I'll have to work a bit harder at that, at keeping the various aspects. I mean, the drawing view was a great one, but it was a challenging one. It was sort of mostly front on, slightly three-quarter. They're very muscly. They are incredibly strong animals. And yeah. Yeah. So wildlife. I'm not sure what a drawing prompt is, I'm afraid, Holly. Yeah. Any more questions before I go and make another video, I guess? Is there anything that you'd like as a video? Hi, Linus. We had a friend from Sweden visiting last week, so we were thinking a lot about Sweden. Any other thoughts or topics for videos that? I see what you mean, Holly. A suggestion of something to draw from. Yeah. Well, why not draw a kangaroo? And if it works out, you've gone past me in the kangaroo department. Well, in Sydney, Australia, it's 10:47 in the morning. You can probably see that. Still morning light coming in. I should draw an iguana. Well, we have goannas in our yard. They're a monitor lizard, which I think is the second largest lizard in the world after the lizard in Indonesia starts with K, I think. Yeah, no, I've actually only ever seen one kangaroo in our street, and that was after we had bushfires and all the wildlife were scattered all because the fire had come up in the bush. All the area that I walk in had been burnt out at that point. It comes back amazingly quickly. Okay, last chance for a question. 30 seconds, counting down. Last chance to suggest a video topic. Do I have any tips on of shading buildings? And if so, do I ever use a pro marker? Yes, yes, I do. I have quite a lot of videos on hatching, and most of them are hatching to do with buildings, which is putting the shade on. I don't use Pro Marker, which I think is a brand, but I use Copic Sketch Marker to do value when I want to put it on. I just use the neutral gray color, and I use from N, which is simply the code for neutral gray, N0 to N6, because I find N6 basically reproduces as black. So although you can see the difference between N6, 7, 8, 9 in life, they will all just merge to the one black in photos. So I have to allow for the fact that my drawings are seen on screen, which is something to consider if you do things the way I do them. And but if I was then going to sell that drawing, I would probably add slightly more contrast to the very darkest values so that it looks a little snappier in real life. A mandarin duck. Well, we have lots of ducks in Australia. I don't think we have a mandarin duck. Yeah, I don't so much have bird pictures as bird videos, which of course aren't the same thing. We have a lot of birds here, though. I think there are 12 different parrots, just for forms of parrots that we get in our yard, at least at some time of the year, if not all the year. We have an incredible, and then we have right down to the little magical blue wrens as well. We have, at times we have eagles and hawks as well. We have lyrebirds all around the place. So it is a beautiful place. Yep, we have king parrots everywhere, eastern rosellas, lorikeets. I love the caroling of the magpies. We had rain overnight, and the magpies just sing beautifully after rain. It's almost like a choir. Last question. Yep, this will be the last question, Linus. Do I have any tips on drawing with charcoal? Look, I haven't done that for so long. I mean, I really haven't done it since I've been drawing as an adult. I'm probably going back to school, but charcoal is amazing for the effects that we can create with it. So firstly, I'd say explore the effects you can create. And secondly, be bold. If you feel like you're learning to draw with charcoal, then experiment, and don't get that I'm doing an artwork, it has to be perfect. Be thinking, no, I'm learning and I'm playing around and I'm exploring. But particularly, I think with charcoal, we can go from light to dark, from thin to thick with our line work so easily and so beautifully that we really need to learn, I think, to firstly control that, but secondly, to visualize what we're wanting to achieve in our lines. I mean, look, the truth is most of the charcoal drawing I've seen is to do with life drawing and portraits, because I think charcoal is just an amazing subject for that. But when we have when we're doing a life portrait and we're capturing these sorts of lines, then the fact that the light's here creates visually a very different effect to here, where the line is actually, in this view, silhouetted against a darker object, and we've got coming down this little bump, and then we've got a bit of a curve here that catches more light because the form is different. And when this line comes to the wrist now, this is not catching the light in the same way. Now, one possibility is that as I come around here, where there's not as much light, my line thickens slightly. I come down here where there's light. I twist my charcoal so I get a sharper edge, and I may be a little less precious so that it's a nice crisp line. But as I come back here and the edge starts to darken in value and the light becomes less, and the line kind of comes into the wrist, which is a bit of a focal point. Perhaps I twist back to a broader bit of charcoal, press a little bit harder, get a bit of heavier line, which also kind of coincides, which also, gosh, can't do these things backwards, that also coincides with the darker values that we have here. And so I'm not just trying to get an accurate outline, but I'm creating a line, a mark, that actually reflects the form, and again, the three-dimensional form, which is easier to see with, and that's why I think a life drawing class is so good, because the roundedness of the human figure that we're drawing, I think, very important to capture. And the difference, I think, between really good drawers of figures with particularly with charcoal, is the ability to vary the line, that the darkness, the width, and to reflect the curves and the lighting as well. Does that make sense, Linus? Yeah. Can use a blending stump too, Holly, but I wouldn't get caught up with that too early, using the blending stump, because we can get too precious with because blending is one of those things that for perfectionists becomes a bit of a stumbling block, I think, because suddenly we want to make all these transitions of light and dark as perfect as they might be on our reference. So, yeah. No, I realize that, Holly, but for some people, making it perfect can become almost pathological, or feeling the need to. I had a little bit of that in my past, which is why I'm just sensitive to it. I think what we need to do when we learn is to not even worry about trying to remove mistakes. Even if we're drawing in pencil, in the starting point, leaving the mistakes on the paper lets me position the real line better. So that becomes a very helpful thing. Mistakes are certainly how we learn. Once I've put a line in the wrong place, it's easier to see the right place. And then the next time I draw, it's perhaps even easier to visualize now before I draw the line what it looks. And if you're like me and with perspective angles, you tend to make them perhaps not quite as steep as they should be, then by seeing the wrong line and then putting the correct line in, I learn how it feels to draw that line at that angle. And therefore, the next time when I'm going to draw it, if my wrist isn't kind of feeling quite the same way, if my arm isn't quite the same way, then it doesn't quite feel right. So I know that I'm not quite positioned well enough. So it's always I think important to, and look, I think when we're learning too, if we leave the mistakes in, it doesn't let us fall into that perfectionistic trap, or to make the mistake of thinking we're producing artworks rather than practice exercises before we're producing artworks, just because in that some things won't happily be but it's good to take that pressure off us by not expecting them and not thinking of them and not trying to craft them as such, but to think, I'm learning skills. I'm learning skills in observation, in creative thinking, in translating what I see into marks, and then learning the skills to put those marks and then see the effect, and then making changes to change the effect I want. So that all takes time, and we won't get it right the first time. Do I prefer pencil or fine liner? And Holly's saying that her stream is lagging a bit. Is anyone else's stream lagging, or are you getting a good run? And look, if you've joined and haven't hit the like button, please do. Do I prefer pencil or fine liner when drawing buildings? Look, I started drawing with pencil. And look, pencil's a different medium. There are wonderful effects that we can get with graphite that are really, really suitable for buildings. and particularly gestural. No, look, I say that, but some of the most detailed architecture drawings I look at are in pencil. But it's just it's just different. It's a different medium, and there are different strengths. I switched to pen. I think the truth is I was drawing in pencil, but I saw all these amazing pen drawings, and I thought that would be great to do for street sketching because I wouldn't be able to fuss with erasers, which I think is just not quite as practical when you're on location. And I think at the time I had to push my confidence, and I thought jumping into the deep end and going with pen was a way to do that. But I also must admit I liked the really strong contrast that we could get um, our drawing um, with pen in some of the work I was looking at. And I thought, yeah, look, all in all, I'm going to give it a go. And so I started, and before too long, I was making YouTube videos of my drawings. Artists who inspire me. Oh, look, so I painted for 10 years. You can see, I think, two of my paintings in the and in that no, in that direction. There's one of my drawings. There's a painting. There's a painting. That's not my painting. That was a gift, that painting. But I have no idea. Oh, artists who inspired me. So I have painters who inspire me, but when I started drawing, the only drawer I was really aware of is an amazing Australian artist who's very famous for his painting in Australia called Lloyd Rees, REES. But I had a book on him that I don't know even where it came from, and he was very famous in the 60s and increasingly the 70s. I think he probably came into his maturity in his painting in a brilliant way. But he did the most amazing drawings, and there were some pictures of in this book of sketches of Paris in pencil that he made in the 50s in I think his first trip to Paris. And I couldn't believe how much was captured in so few marks. And yeah, so he is in terms of drawing, he is the artist who inspired me. Not at all the way I draw, ironically, but yeah, every now and then I still look at his drawings. Have I taken lessons in architecture, or have you? Look, I have no architecture training. I'm not an architect. I did consider it when I left school, but I became a high school teacher instead. But clearly I've always enjoyed architecture, and because I enjoy it to look at, I look at it, and I look at it carefully. So in some ways I had a head start in observation in drawing architecture that I wouldn't have in lots of other areas. So that's probably helpful. When I first started art again, when I was 50 years old, I did a one subject introduction to drawing and a one subject introduction to painting, just for a year. They were just as they were like the introductory courses for a technical college certificate. And I really just did them to make me start, because it was 3 hours a week that would force me to do something, because I knew just with my commitments, I would need to have a bit of structure. And yeah, loved it, and still doing it. Do I ever like to do it? Yeah, I do. Yeah, there are a few challenges with that, to do as much as I'd like at the moment, but I do have some videos on location sketching that I've done. I've got a couple that I haven't made, but I've got the videos and the drawings for them as well. So yeah, it's a very, very different experience. I love the fact that that you remember the scene so well. It really does make a big difference. Okay, well, look, thanks for joining. And if you draw from photos, I hope this has been helpful. And one last chance for the 7 people still there to hit the like button for me. Am I going to be traveling this year? Look, I'd like to. A few things have to fall into place for that to happen, but I'm very much hoping to be in Europe. I'm a bit annoyed that Paris has the Olympics because I don't really want to be there in all the crowds. So, you know, maybe for us, a spring trip, and for Europe and autumn trip. My son traveled to Europe over Christmas, New Year last year, and it looked very cold and dark. So I don't think I'll be going then, whatever happens. Yep. Have a good day, everyone. Good day for us. It's 11 a.m. here, so maybe it's time for another cup of coffee for me. And get organized on a video. Thanks for joining. See ya.